Hello, I'm Mishka, and this channel is the Helsinki Renaissance, where we will be talking about arts and culture in hopefully such a manner that there will be something worthwhile in these videos. Something in an earlier video, I don't know whether worthwhile or not, I think needs some kind of addressing because I believe it was that video which I may come to title something like uh, a generic, a construction of a generic critics top 10 of Finnish cinema. So I tried to, since at least I can't offhand remember that there would be a comparable list that what the American Film Institute's top 100 best American movies or any such. I can't remember some poll like that having taken from collecting the opinions of Finnish filmmakers or film critics. So I just thought that I'd make the kind of sample top 10 of the kind of stuff that Finnish film critics usually throw into the top 10. And so anyway, in that video, I was just sort of in general terms talking about some of the films in the top 10. One of those films in there would have been Commissario Palmu Erehdys, which literally translates to the mistake of Inspector Palmu. But I think the international English language title is something like The Mystery of the Rucksack Murders, which I don't think is much of an improvement. But I mean, usually Finnish films tend to have pretty bad English language titles. But anyway, whatever title that's going by. What I happen to say about that Inspector Palmu movie is that I tried to describe it to foreign viewers who probably haven't seen it, and the description that immediately came to mind was me saying that perhaps the experience is a bit like if there would be a retelling of, an Agatha Christie book, but done for hipsters. I think Inspector Palmu could probably sort of corner that market. Anyway, I just said it because that's sort of around that movie, in that, the writer of those three of the four Inspector Palmu movies is Mika Waltari, who, he made his name with the kind of grand historical novels that well, I mean, it was a more formidable genre in the past. So just like painters from, say, my generation or the earlier generation, they don't depict grand historical subject matters that much anymore. So like those grand historical books, they would have been part of the past. But what I'm trying to get at is that there was a time when basically those grand historical works were the most prestigious kinds of books out there, and Mika Waltari would have been specializing in those. so anyway, like Mika Walteri, he had amply proven his literary credentials. So when it came to him doing sometimes comedies, he felt like he could just let loose and have a bit of fun, and that he wouldn't like need to try to earn anything with the works. So that's why, because Mika Waltari, he apparently had enough confidence in himself and, just confidence that he could like get away with it or something, that there's a tremendous amount of intentional archness to those Inspector Palmu movies. Like, in that the mistake of Inspector Palmu, there's a butler in the story, and they are playing around with the ideas that could the butler be the one who done it or not, and that type of intentional archness that almost like it sort of flirts with being an ironic detective or police procedural, but like it's basically played straight, but always just a bit off. And then Matti Kassila, the director, it's almost like there's like the slightest suggestion of like new wave type techniques throughout those Inspector Palmu movies. So even though certainly no one involved in Inspector Palmu was a hipster, it still seems like that's almost the kind of tonality that is there. But anyway, the reason why I'm doing this video is because I foresee some people potentially having a problem with me describing those Inspector Palmu movies in that manner. The first group that could have a problem is the fans of Inspector Palmu movies, and there are quite a few in Finland, who don't want those movies associated with hipsters because they think that those movies are good and hipsters aren't. Or alternatively, some people who see themselves as hipsters might have a problem with them being associated with the Inspector Palmu movies because they are too mainstream. Well, like those Inspector Palmu movies, they were high-profile productions with movie stars. So, it's not as if there genuinely is anything hipster-like about it. I just tried to describe the kind of tonality in those movies. But anyway, because this kind of problem slightly accidentally happened, I thought that I could make this video about what I think hipsters are. Because I think that there's quite a lot of people who think they know. Like if I have an insert amount of viewers, how many of them could possibly say that they don't know what hipsters are? So like everyone thinks that they know, but then why I think it's perhaps worth addressing in this video is because I think that the general opinions about hipsters, it's as if there's like a bit of the game of broken telephone being played, and some people who think they know, I would just rather question whether they do. So anyway, I just happened to be reading a certain Nietzsche book fairly recently, a couple of nights ago. And section 268 begins with Nietzsche having a German word called die Gemeinheit, and wondering what is it that the concept of die Gemeinheit actually means. So basically, I mean, because this just happens to be in Finnish, I won't read it, and I can't be bothered to translate it on the fly. But anyway, basically, what Nietzsche is saying that that the Gemeinheit, it's the reference framework of shared experience. So anyway, like if you have been, say, you know, if you've been caught in a, I don't know, rainstorm, for instance, like if you have been caught in a rainstorm and I have been caught in a rainstorm, and we both know what the experience of, you know, it's just starting to rain down all of a sudden. If we both know what that type of an experience is, and if we both have had that experience multiple times, you know, this Gemeinheit would be that, you know, I am here, you are there, but it's as if there's a point C, and that point C would be the framework of the shared experiences. So the only way that anything is intelligible for anyone else is if we have that Gemeinheit, if we have that framework of shared experiences. If somebody who doesn't speak English would hear me talking about rainstorms, they might just be like, "Okay," you know, they just wouldn't understand what a rainstorm is. So because like English language wouldn't be within the framework of wouldn't be that framework of shared experiences being like a point that we can use, something that we can use as a reference point when we talk about something. Because, for instance, if I start talking about a Finnish director called Edwin Laine, if you've never seen an Edwin Laine movie, if you've never heard of an Edwin Laine movie, we don't have any Gemeinheit over it, because it's I have experiences with Edwin Laine movies, but some of my viewers don't have. So the shared experience is lacking, and no kind of communication can happen on a certain level because of that lack of shared experiences as a reference point. So anyway, I just think that this Gemeinheit is rather the key to this problem with hipsters, or problem with people thinking that they know what hipsters are. Because when talking about hipsters, I really think that well, at least for me, the first literary example that I've heard of anyone using the term hipster is Ginsberg in his poem called The Howl. he's talking about golden-haired hipsters doing something potentially poetical. I forget how it is that the line goes, but anyway, like it's a word that I guess I could understand it being born somewhere around, say, mid 20th century New York. That if in like Greenwich Village, people start, using the term hipster to refer to a certain kind of young aesthete. But anyway, like, this isn't about like who invented the word or anything like that. It's just about the reference point to hipsters. So anyway, when Ginsberg wrote about hipsters in his poem called The Howl, he had one kind of reference point. So like Allen Ginsberg would be one point, his reader would be another point, and then the hipsters would be a reference point. And then the thing is, let's say that Allen Ginsberg had a reader in Greenwich Village, and let's say that another reader would have been a 60-year-old professor of theology from Oxford or something. It couldn't be taken for granted that, say, a reader from Greenwich Village and, let's say, an Oxford professor, that they'd have the same Gemeinheit over the reference point of hipsters. So I just want to put that as like a precedent that the Gemeinheit of the shared experiences would only happen if, let's say in this case, the writer and the reader have sort of comparable existences. So that if you would have sort of lived a bit like Ginsberg would have lived, you could maybe have the same kind of Gemeinheit over the term, and that if I'm assuming that somebody like an Oxford professor would, if not be the polar opposite of Ginsberg, then maybe at least sort of in the ballpark. But anyway, I just want to put it out there that Gemeinheit, how should I put it? A person may use the word, but just because you're using a given word doesn't mean that you have the same Gemeinheit over the word as with other people. I really want to underline that idea, because, like, surely you understand that an Oxford professor can just take a given word that, let's say, some 20-somethings are using, and an Oxford professor could have like a general understanding of what a word means. Like you could, tell an Oxford professor what a hipster is, but just because they are getting a kind of idea of what a hipster is doesn't mean that just because a word is explained that that explanation brings the Gemeinheit, because it doesn't. You have to have lived life the same kind of way, or that you basically have to be parallel lines with the speaker to have the same kinds of experiences in this particular instance to have that Gemeinheit. So anyway, I just want to put that out there as basically the main point of this video, is that the reason why I think some people misunderstand hipsters is because they are like that Oxford professor in this particular example, in that the word would have been explained to them, but they wouldn't have had the same kind of experiences that the people who originally brought forth the term. So anyway, like Ginsberg would have one kind of set of experiences with the term hipster. Like, it's as if the word hipster came organically to him because it came out of his experiences. So if we fast forward a bit, I believe there's, I want to say something like 1983, perhaps give or take a couple of years, but there's a Chris Marker documentary called Sans Soleil. Anyway, there's a moment in the narration of Sans Soleil where Chris Marker is saying that in Japan of the period that the documentary is set in. So in the Japan of, say, 1983, hipsters have taken into wearing spare parts of electronics, ironically as jewelry, around their necks. So it's as if like a hipster would wear something like a tourist camera, or like a broken Game Boy or something around their neck as like a parody of jewelry. So anyway, when Chris Marker said that hipsters have started wearing electronic spare parts as jewelry, Chris Marker had a frame of reference about what hipsters are that probably is sort of roughly equating to him having more or less like perfectly natural Gemeinheit with Ginsberg, in that what Ginsberg would have thought hipsters are is something, and what Chris Marker would have thought hipsters are probably is, they are more or less thinking about the same group of people, that they genuinely would have the same kind of experience about what hipsters are. But then the problem is that, when Allen Ginsberg would have written Howl, hipsters certainly wouldn't have been like any kind of household term, so that you generally would have needed somebody to explain it to you if you hear it for the first time. And then when Chris Marker did his documentary, again, I don't believe that the term hipster would have been in wide usage in around 1983 or something. So basically, what I'm trying to get is that originally the term hipster, it probably would have only been used by people who have the kind of Gemeinheit about the term. So basically, the only people who use the term are the people who know what it is referring to. But then, I suppose, in the parlance of modern times, there would have been some period where it's as if the concept of hipsters would have gone viral. Then what would have happened is that the people who don't have the shared reference point of experiences, the people who don't have the same Gemeinheit of, say, Ginsberg or Marker, they would still use the word, but they'd basically start using it in an incredibly random manner, because what's basically happening is that usually something exists in the world first. For instance, if I have a book here, certainly books existed before the word book existed, Like, it wouldn't make any sense for the word book to exist before there was something that was referring to, a book here. Thing with printed text. So, like, somebody just thought to collect materials in bound volumes. So, written text existed in, like, sometimes stones, sometimes papyrus scrolls or whatever. Like, written text existed before books did, but, like, sometimes, somebody just created a book, and then the physical object existed first, and then the word followed. So, like, if we want to talk about what's natural, what should be natural is that first you have to see something. You have to have an experience first, and then you put a name to a face. Like, it wouldn't make any kind of sense to first create a name and then to try to create a face to the name. So, like, what I'm trying to say is that it's profoundly unnatural for anyone to hear of a name first, and then, like, it's as if there would be like some sort of a vacuum, and then people are trying to create the experience to match the term that they've heard. I don't know how many of my viewers can possibly sympathize about just how bizarre it is that there are people who hear a word, and then it's something that they don't have proper experiences with, but they are trying their best to basically force fit experiences to match the term, so that they basically fast track their knowledge of the situation. So, like, there are people who they've never met the kind of people that say Chris Marker would have met. Like, Chris Marker, if he used the word hipster, it's because he had met the kind of people for whom the word had to be applied to. So the people were there first, and then their name was just like, the people, like, a given group of people who followed a given tradition, like, those people existed first, and then the word was used after. But the problem is that if hipster is referring to a group of people who are following a given tradition, if there are people who have never met those people following that tradition, but they still insist on trying to use the word hipster and trying to understand the word hipster, but because that Gemeinheit is missing, that's what basically is turning the culture of the so-called hipsters basically on its head, because people are trying to go about having experiences with that situation in completely backwards manner. But anyway, I'm just trying to sort of give the larger context around the situation, if there would be anyone who would find it useful. So anyway, I think well, in that Emilio Estevez Charlie Sheen movie called Men at Work, they are sometimes perplexed by proposals, and I can't remember which one of them. Perhaps it was Emilio Estevez who was talking to his. I don't know if they're playing brothers in that movie, but anyway, let's say they are. And Emilio Estevez was saying to his brother, when confused over a term, is that let's just examine the word. So if there is a word like hipster, to examine the word, as men at work would advise us to do, I'd say that the unlocking the meaning of how the term came to be is pretty straightforward. In that first there was to be hip to something was used as a verb. So before there could be hipsters, there had to be a slang expression that somebody was hip to something. Anyway, to be hip to something, I mean, that would be like a slang version of saying that somebody was in the know. So it's as if there would be two kinds of people, those who would be streetwise, as it were, and those who wouldn't. And then the people who would have a given subculture's basically mark of approval that such and such a person was streetwise when it came to a given thing, that there would be like some kind of a peer evaluation and approval, that people who would see that there are hip individuals and then those who aren't. So some people are streetwise and others aren't, and then the streetwise people as if admit others into their circle of being streetwise. So anyway, like some people are hip and then they are acknowledging others as also being hip. So anyway, that kind of culture of I guess some kind of cliques of like-minded people being formed. Like, it should be recognized that certainly precedes the word hipster. And so anyway, I would say that how it is that the word hipster almost certainly would have had to have formed is that there were people who were chasing that approval. So, it's as if there would be some kind of a competition about who would be the most hip, who would be like the most highly rated about their some kind of achievements in a given field, that the hipsters would somehow try to specialize in sort of it being understood that they are the people who are most in the know. So anyway, to me, like the history of hipsters, it perhaps would most obviously be explained through the even older tradition of dandies. So anyway, to me, the explanation of what a hipster actually is, most obviously, is that a hipster is like a postmodern dandy. And like when I see lots of people being described as hipsters, and some of those people who, after the word hipster would have gone viral, like some of those people who still would be called hipsters by some people, but certainly they wouldn't be the kind of hipsters that Chris Marker would have been talking about, or they would have been the kind of hipsters that Ginsberg would have been talking about. It's because those people wouldn't be like postmodern dandies. They would just be the kind of people who would like sort of like superficially copy paste some of the things that hipsters do. So you know, if there are some people who, for whatever reason, would like to be seen as hipsters, I guess the easiest way to like dupe some people who aren't hipsters into thinking that they might be hipsters would be to just you know, to just copy paste what some others are doing. But basically, like why to me it seems like there is some kind of a chain being broken is because some of those younger people who are trying to pass themselves off as hipsters because they really aren't postmodern dandies. And I would imagine that a lot of those younger people who might wish to be seen as hipsters, they perhaps don't even really comprehend what it is that a dandy is. So perhaps I could talk a bit further about that as well. So anyway, if we go back a bit into an old order of Europe where there would have been this kind of formidable landowning families. So there would have been, you know, powerful families in society where people would have been, you know, just living off of their interests. So the family fortune would be, you know, sitting pretty on some bank account, and then the family just lives off of the interest and they pass off that family fortune down the generations. So anyway, if we go to some you know, 19th century picture of, say, Paris or London, well, some of these sons of those powerful families, because they were basically born into wealth, they had no need to work. They didn't even want to work. Like they just like being in the leisure classes. So anyway, what happened is that I guess those people who didn't want to work of the leisure classes, they still felt like they should do something with their days. So, well, what happened is that those people who didn't like the idea of working, they as if gave way to the hobby of being a dandy. So anyway, these people, like, it's difficult, like, because like our society is just so different. It's difficult really trying to get people to relate to the idea that there were some kind of gentleman amateurs who, like, their vocation would have almost be, you know, being that gentleman amateur, in that those dandies, what they wanted to do is, you know, if dandies would have been talking about politics or philosophy or literature or painting, what they would have liked to do is that they would have just wanted to cherry pick and only do what they found amusing to do. In that they didn't like the idea that, you know, when you're a professional, you can't just cherry pick what you find amusing to do. Sometimes life forces situations on you that you don't want, but you just have to take it. But anyway, like what the dandies, I suppose, found the position attractive is because they basically were in the kind of position that they could just come and go as they pleased, and just try to just take the best kinds of moments in those situations. But anyway, um, uh, like I mean the different things would have been admired in the 18th century and the 19th century. So, like, of course, you could be just a pretty little idiot with a lot of money. You could be that and you could get away with it, but you couldn't really be respected. So, like, in as much as some of those young gentlemen wanted to uh, gain some kind of social cachet, some of them just tried to do it through being dandies. But anyway, like what a dandy was, the kind of man about town who would basically try to be able to handle all the kind of social situations that they might get through, that would try to know a bit of everything, but not to really commit to anything in ways that might become tedious. Um, I mean, I don't suppose that there are many other kinds of reference points beyond maybe Oscar Wilde as showing the kind of uh, showing the kind of picture of that what must be called the lost world by now. In that there would have been some people who they just would have found it amusing to talk with great confidence about, say, Renaissance painters, or they would want to talk with great confidence about the current state of opera, or would have wanted to talk with great confidence about the Greek question or something. And dandies would have just specialized in, I guess, being with it. But only as the kind of, high-handed, slightly bored, you know, um, like dilettante versions of a Renaissance prince. So, like they would have tried to be the Lorenzo de' Medici of their own life or something. But anyway, like what was most integral to being a dandy is that you basically had to come from money. You had to be in the leisure classes to be at leisure to be a dandy. Because on some level, being a dandy was almost like a full-time job, the way that people committed to being dandies. So, because England and France, they had lots of rich families. Those rich families had sons, and some of those sons would have been committing to being dandies. And so London and Paris, for instance, would have had lots of those flaneurs. So anyway, that was what dandies were, and then I guess like I mean you couldn't really it almost sounds like an Honoré de Balzac story, the idea that there would be a poor dandy. I suppose somebody could just about try to hack it out, but it would really be rather awkward, and that if somebody tried to be a poor dandy, they would just have to stretch themselves so far that the mere activity of trying to break a sweat is the most undandy-like thing to do. So you couldn't really have a dandy from anywhere but the upper classes. Anyway, I guess, you know, like some of those mannerisms that the dandies were striking, I suppose some of them must have sort of caught on, and then some people would have tried to start emulating what dandies were. And I guess part of that evolutionary process is that, you know, like when societies underwent great changes and the demographic breakdown of the modern community is completely different from what it would have been in like 1800 AD. So because we just don't have that kind of a society anymore. So so like the dandies as they were, they became a bit of an impossibility. And I guess hipsters in the 20th century, they would have sort of maybe kind of been there to fill the void left by dandies, if you want to look at the situation like that. But anyway, like if the dandies would have been like some sort of just some kind of world-weary cosmopolitans who would have just wanted to like be like you know, be in the element in any given situation when it came to arts or culture or whatever. I guess hipsters wanted to pick up where the dandies left off, and that certainly would have been true up to a point, but then you know, if the word hipster went viral, as it were, then that would have caused a kind of confusion that certainly a lot of the people who would be called hipsters right now, they don't have any kind of link to that kind of old world of dandies, and that's why because you know, initially there was a sense of Gemeinheit about the people who would have been using the word hipster. You know, after it went viral, that Gemeinheit was basically broken, and then, you know, what the word hipster, what it started meaning afterwards is that if there's some fashion conscious young aesthete who has somehow you know, started doing some contemporary fashion statements, then something like that would almost be enough to be a hipster. But like I said, in the 19th century, being a dandy would almost be like a full-time job. And certainly the kind of hipsters that Chris Marker would have known, like it would have been a 24/7 lifestyle to them. They would be the kind of postmodern dandies who, like, if in Robert Altman's The Player movie, based on the Michael Tolkien book, if in Robert Altman's there's a moment where it's played as a joke that there's a black and white party that Cher showed up in a red dress, knowing that they couldn't turn her away. So, like, the idea of that situation, it almost has like a hipster type dynamic to it, in that Cher knew what the etiquette was, she knew fully well what a black and white party means, but she looked at her own position and she would have deemed it that yes, there are rules, but if you're just big enough a star, you can break those rules. And I think that, if there are some, if I go along with that situation, Chris Marker talking about Japanese hipsters using electronic spare parts as like jewelry. Like, again, if there would be like rules of the etiquette, certainly those Japanese hipsters know, what one should do and what one shouldn't do. But I guess just like Cher thought that she was just such a big star that she can break the rules, those Japanese hipsters in that Chris Marker example, they would also think that they are such hip stars when it comes to, being with it or something, that they can break the rules and, what everyone will associate with certain kinds of hipsters is that they're doing something ironically. Like they would do the wrong thing ironically as like some kind of meta commentary that yes, they know the rules of the etiquette, but gosh darn, when one is a world weary dandy, one stops giving a hoot about the rules. So anyway, I think that what the hipster thing has become is that yes, there probably are some people who would go there certainly are some people who would be like modern day dandies, all right? So those people are there and they are undeniably hipsters. It's just too screamingly obvious. But then after the word hipster went viral, there are people for whom it isn't any kind of 24/7 lifestyle. It's just that they are just, for whatever reason, wanting to imitate, I guess, who they perhaps perceive as the cool kids or something. And they want to be a bit like them, and so they just copy paste whatever it is that the cooler kids are doing. And then, if both the people who set a trend and then the people who follow the trend, if they're both called hipsters, to me, with the latter group, it's a misnomer, because certainly the real hipsters of the original line, if you will, they would be mortified at the idea of just following some stupid fads that just happen to be the floating around this season. Anyway, it's just because I happened to be reading this last night, or was it 2 nights ago? I just wanted to bring that concept of the Gemeinheit, of the shared experience, in that the reason why such randomness has taken over the conversation about hipsters is because that there has been that loss of the Gemeinheit. Anyway, after I read that, it just sort of seemed to make sense. But anyway, to me, it's almost funny that it's as if a different kind of culture almost has formed over the people who aren't hipsters but want to be seen as hipsters. It's as if if there is some kind of a game of broken telephone about non-hipsters trying to comprehend hipsters, it's as if some kind of pseudo-hipsters have been born in that kind of strangeness. I certainly don't think that they have any artistic merit to them. I don't know what kind of value there could be, but I don't know, like there is something interesting. Uh, like it's saying something interesting about our society, that people who like, I mean, I don't know. It's a somewhat baffling situation, but anyway, I just wanted to make one video saying that maybe I stand by what I said about that Inspector Palmu movie, or maybe I don't mean exactly what I said. I don't know. It's a strange situation. Um, but like perhaps that's telling of the kind of relative meaninglessness of the what the word hipster has recently come to mean, because this is the uh, you know, it used to be something almost like like the personal philosophy of some esthetes, and now it's as if just like a couple of if just a couple of telltale signs would be there, then it's as if it would be enough to use the word in the situation. But I don't know. Did I contribute to the problem by using the word? Should I just blacklist the word and not use it at all? I don't know. But anyway, I just wanted to make this video so that I wouldn't have to explain in the comments to some people about what can I have been meaning and what shouldn't have been meant, and that's I don't know. But anyway, that's enough for now. If you want to tell me that I'm right or that I'm wrong or that I don't even know what, you can of course do that. But I just deemed this very lengthy. I don't know. This probably isn't a postscript. I don't know what this is. A digression. This lengthy digression in lieu of a postscript just seems semi-necessary. Just so you wouldn't say that I am too casually careless with my using of the word hipster. So anyway, like this video exists so that I couldn't be charged with not thinking things through, as I described that particular old Finnish movie. But anyway, those were sort of my thoughts around this situation, and I thank everyone for watching. But yeah, that was all for me, so bye bye.